And so, very well welcome to everyone. For most of you, it is probably the evening, or maybe even later at night. For me, it is sort of early afternoon. I'm in Mexico City right now, but I am very sleepy, so that works. And the title of this session is A Lazy Introduction to Yoga Nidra. We will do an actual yoga nidra towards the end of the session. And my suggestion is for us to begin with a gentle meditation as well. And in between the two, we will sandwich some general ideas about the history, the overall logic of yoga nidra, and its connection to some of the Buddhist practices that are becoming increasingly popular in this day and age. So let's start with a little bit of meditation if you feel like doing it. Otherwise, it's totally fine to just rest for the time being. But if you do want to do it, once again, some people feel comfortable keeping their camera on and sharing their presence with the rest of the group. Some people prefer to turn their camera off and kind of enter a personal bubble of practice, sort of a tiny retreat of their own. That's also totally fine. And for both this meditation and the practice of Yoga Nidra itself, you're very welcome to do it in the supine position, lying flat on your back. But this meditation can also be done in the upright position if you prefer, as long as you can maintain a certain level of clarity and stability or stillness, both in your body and in your mind. Either option is fine. And so let's spend the first few moments finding a comfortable stationary position and then adjusting the position of our body, the posture of our body as we ourselves see fit. Some of the general ideas to explore is gently elongating the spine if possible, relaxing and dropping the shoulders, making sure the chin is slightly tucked in, choosing whether to keep our eyes open or closed. If they're open, leaving our gaze vacant, and just relaxing without paying any attention to any particular physical object in our field of vision. And then with all that preparation, bringing our awareness to our somatic field with all of its tactile experiences, the field of the body, and in particular, noticing our contact with the ground, with the earth that's holding us. Noticing the experiences of firmness, stillness, and stability there, the safety, the reliability. And allowing the parts of the body that are currently touching the ground to inspire the process of in relaxation. First for our feet and toes, and our legs in general. Then for our pelvic floor, our lower abdomen, and our lower back. The space of our torso, where we can notice the sensations associated with the process of breathing. A very gentle type of expansion and contraction accompanying each inhalation and exhalation. Then our shoulders, upper arms, forearms, hands and fingers. Our facial muscles, releasing the tension, noticing the sensations there. And then the entirety of the body. Observing the overall dance of sensations throughout our somatic field with openness and curiosity. And in particular, noticing these tactile shifts as we naturally breathe in and as we naturally breathe out. Gently placing our awareness on these shifting sensations, and through observing them, releasing the unnecessary tension and arriving at greater and greater levels of relaxation, stillness, and at the same time vigilance in the body, and relaxation, stability, and clarity for the mind. Coming back to these sensations again and again whenever our attention gets dragged away by stories or outer sensations, including sounds and so forth. And then with our body resting in this manner, still relaxing more and more deeply with each exhalation, we can perform a different type of settling related to our ability to wish, desire, aspire, intend. And to do that, we first and foremost check our aspirations, our wishes, our desires for being here. What is it that we want to realize? What is that we want to attain? What are we curious about? What do we want to explore? In familiarizing ourselves with the practice of Yoga Nidra. Once we have identified our initial motivation, we can potentially play with it. If we want, we can make it more expansive and more profound. more expansive in that we can aspire for greater well-being for multiple beings, not just for ourselves, potentially for all who live. And we can make this motivation more profound by aspiring for a deeper type of well-being, deeper than simply the hedonic pleasure we experience through outer stimulation. And then once we have found a suitable aspiration, for example, aspiring for a deeper knowledge of ourselves or for a deeper uncovering of our amazing potential, for a stronger connection to our own basic goodness, so that all who live may experience freedom and happiness. Once we have identified such a motivation for ourselves, something deeply personal and unique perhaps, but also fairly universal, we can spend some moments just breathing life into that with each new exhalation, strengthening that intention, aspiring for that genuine well-being. Then allowing that to remain in the background of our mind, coming back to the body to once again notice the sensations and the experiences there. And then very gently introducing some movement to the body by slowly rocking back and forth, reactivating our facial muscles, opening our eyes if we close them. Slowly concluding the practice and coming back to our shared online space. And so just to manage expectations, I don't know what your kind of initial understanding of it was. I think we tried to make it clear with the description, but this is an introductory session that also includes an actual yoga nidra. So we will definitely be doing a yoga nidra, but this is not a 90-minute yoga nidra practice. This is sort of an intro for those who might want to just revisit some of the foundational points related to the history of this tradition, its logic, its applications, its potential benefits. So for the next, I don't know, 45 minutes or so, which is going to discuss some points, and you're once again very welcome to ask questions or raise points and so forth. And then we'll do the actual yoga nidra, which will hopefully put you into a very restful mode. So if you are in the European time zone, which is probably true for many people here, that will hopefully prepare you for a full night of rest. And as for me, I'll also take a nap after this. So, we're kind of on the same wavelength. So, also, just as a kind of comedy relief note, not that it's funny, but when I was looking through kind of my notes on Yoga Nidra and trying to organize it all in a coherent manner, I felt very inspired. So I felt like, oh, wow, maybe I should just abandon all the other parts of my work and just run Yoga Nidra sessions all the time for people. Because I don't know if anyone remembers a very, well, it's not very old, but kind of now it's kind of old American sitcom by the name of Friends, which is how a lot of people from my geographical region learned English. And I'm hearing these days also lots of people in Cuba as well, just watching Friends, learning English, dealing with typical white people problems. But there was one of the queer characters on that show once said, "Peaceful bodies make peace," as kind of a motivation for why she's massaging UN diplomats. So that made me think, oh, what if we ran yoga nidra sessions, and actual yoga nidra, the one we're going to be talking about, that can take us much deeper than kind of our surface level activities. What if we were actually running that for many people across the board, school children, school teachers, diplomats, decision makers, anyone really, anyone who needs some profound rest and a way to connect to their deeper nature. Wouldn't that be lovely? So if I ever get completely fed up with everything else that I'm doing, I'll just start doing yoga nidras as my primary source of income. In the meantime, just as a side note, I don't know whether it's of any importance really, but just to mention something that's traditionally, and in a way that's traditionally used in the Indo-Tibetan tradition. My background is that I'm kind of, I guess, my major in college was South Asian studies, and I gradually shifted towards Tibetan studies. I'm a Buddhist translator and interpreter, and probably the best thing that happened to me in my life is that I've had the great privilege of translating for many incredible teachers of the Tibetan tradition, but not simply of Tibetan origin. I've had translated from many, many Tibetan teachers, but also teachers from other ethnic communities in the Himalayan region, and also first and second generation Western teachers of the same tradition as well. And so that's kind of where all the Buddhist stuff is coming from. On the other side, I have been a practitioner of yoga and yoga nidra myself for many years. I started in high school, and I first got to substitute for a yoga nidra class in 2009, I think, or 2010, and have kind of kept using the skills obtained through attending yoga nidra classes since then. I think yoga nidra is, in addition to all the other facets of yoga, and yoga nidra is one of the most amazing offerings that a yoga teacher can share. But this is where it's helpful to have an overall understanding of kind of how yoga nidra connects to the deeper levels of our mind and so forth. And why is it, yes, a very valuable relaxation technique, but also something beyond that. So that's what we're going to discuss. Another note on this is that I'm so happy. And so thank you, Kat. First of all, thank you. And thank you to Phil as well, and to Sangha Yoga School. I'm so happy to be doing this session where I can just say yoga nidra, and no one gets shocked and disconnects. Because in particular, in the last 3 years or so, more and more people have started referring to these practices using Western acronyms and Western kind of coined terms like non-sleep, deep relaxation, and things like that. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but when it's done in reference to these very practices, with no mention of their actual origins, their history, their lineage, and so forth, that's just straight up colonialism. That's just some white dude from California telling you about how he, in his super cool lab, came up with these results, but screw India, and I don't think that's proper. Everything that I know came from the Himalayan communities, and I think it's very wonderful that we get to say the words yoga nidra, and talk about the history of this stuff openly, without having to be closeted yogis or closeted Buddhists or closeted meditators, which used to be a thing in many fields of science. So let me just find my horrible slides. Once again, this is a lazy introduction to yoga nidra, and you will see that in the slides. That will also be fairly sloppy. And so the first thing that's usually done in the Buddhist tradition when these topics are discussed is an introduction to the history of a particular lineage. Often one would talk about how one themselves received these particular teachings from whom, or they would talk about the original kind of genesis of a specific practice and how it arose, how it was brought to a specific region by this teacher and that teacher. And that's actually a very helpful approach because, first of all, it is the thing that allows us to overcome kind of the colonial tendency to take everything out of its context and then present it as if we came up with that. Second, that's a good scientific or academic practice, because in academia, quoting your sources is so important. It's just basic, a basic skill that's developed by everyone writing their papers first on the BA level and then MA level and so forth. So that's a good practice. Third, It's just something that shows us that these methods have a history and they have been applied for many generations. And even if we don't resonate with these methods, after looking at them, we decide, oh, that's not for me. That's not helpful in my case. That's totally fine. But at least we know, hey, well, many people did find this helpful. And it's because they found it helpful that they transmitted it further. The thing about Yoga Nidra, though, is that when we try to identify its ultimate roots, that becomes a little bit difficult because there are mentions of Yoga Nidra in some of the more ancient texts, including Devi Mahatmya, which is an incredible and wonderful text of the Shakta tradition, meaning it's a text on the worship of goddess within the broad scope of what we these days refer to as Hinduism. And that's, of course, a term that is, in a way, difficult because it applies to so many diverse traditions, so many different movements, so many different systems of psychopractice, and so many systems of philosophy. But broadly speaking, we use it because it does have some explanatory power, at least in terms of differentiating the so-called Hinduism from other traditions that arose in the Indian subcontinent, including Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. So from that point of view, very roughly speaking, the Shakta tradition has this incredible text by the name of Devi Mahatmya, which is one of the kind of root texts for praising the goddess, still very widely used these days. And Yoga Nidra is referenced there. It is also referenced in some of the early sources on Vishnu worship. So Vishnu, the god associated with preservation, but sometimes also depicted as the ultimate personhood of the divine. Vishnu, famous for his avatars such as Krishna and Rama and so forth, is depicted in some of these earlier sources as occasionally entering a profound sense of a state of sleep, sort of when the universe is unmanifest and the ultimate kind of expression of the divine is resting. And the state of sleep that Vishnu is abiding is in these texts referred to as Yoga Nidra. In Devi Mahatmya, it's the state of sleep that is described as kind of expression of the goddess's energy. So the goddess puts Vishnu to sleep. And in one particularly interesting episode, Vishnu is asleep. Brahma was already manifested out of Vishnu's navel, is kind of already awake. Then some demons come and try and attack Brahma, and he prays to the goddess so that she would kind of exit Vishnu's body, leave Vishnu's body, so that Vishnu would wake up and protect Brahma from those demons that are attacking him. So even though Vishnu is kind of a higher authority with regards to Brahma, even though Brahma is in that kind of description arising from Vishnu's navel, it is the goddess that is ultimately in control there, because it is the goddess manifesting as the goddess of Yoga Nidra, or as Yoga Nidra, kind of as an expression of goddess, yogic sleep. It is the goddess that is ultimately in control, which is a very typical theme for the Shakti literature in general and the Shakti tradition, Shakti worship tradition. So we find these very occasional mentions in earlier texts with no explanation with regards to, oh, well, how does this relate to my practice and how do I apply it as a method? It's just mentions of the particular states or particular expressions of the divine. Then later on, when we enter the medieval stage, and that's where Hatha Yoga Pradipika by Svatmarama was written, it's approximately the 15th century AD, we find very specific mentions of Yoga Nidra as something that already relates to our own yogic practice. But still, compared to what we have these days, it's still very schematic. It's still not particularly clear. But here in Hatha Yoga Pradipika in particular, Svatmarama says, Kichare should be practiced until yogic sleep, Yoga Nidra, occurs. For one has attained yogic sleep, time becomes non-existent. So Kichare, as many people would know, is a fairly advanced mudra. And it is a mudra that in particular is practiced by rolling one's tongue backwards, sometimes just through practicing with it regularly so that it attains that flexibility. Sometimes, and that's an extreme variant of it, which is kind of controversial. There are different opinions about it. Sometimes through very, very slowly cutting the frenulum of the tongue, sometimes with a sharp piece of salt, very, very slowly in incremental kind of steps until it once again can become flexible enough to move backwards. Obviously, a very dangerous practice, not recommended at all. In this case, nothing to do with what we're doing here, but just for context, for historical context. So Kichari is a mudra that allows one to kind of roll one's tongue backwards, and through that receive the flow of nectar that flows from certain special centers, energetic centers in the head. And once that nectar starts flowing down the tongue, one attains much greater degree of control over both one's consciousness and one's subtle energy, and also one's, as Buddhists would say, subtle drops or essential energies. And as a result of that, as it says here, one would attain yogic sleep, yoga nidra, a state in which one is sort of asleep, but still has the clarity of awareness. And then, as the next two lines say, for one who has attained yogic sleep, time becomes non-existent. So there are different kind of interpretations and commentaries on this point. One particular way of interpreting it is that yogic sleep, unlike regular sleep that we as regular beings enter all the time, and sometimes we wish we would enter them more, yogic sleep is associated with a very special type of consciousness that in the yogic tradition, and this is where there's overlap between Buddhism and kind of roughly speaking, the Hindu traditions in general, this yogic sleep is associated with the so-called fourth mental state, fourth type of consciousness, the fourth type of awareness that is available to us. So we will talk about this a bit more later, but just roughly speaking, these four are the waking state, and that's where we are right now, unless you're already falling asleep from my kind of clumsy explanations. The second one is deep sleep without dreams. That's the one we hopefully enter on a regular basis because it's restorative and important, and that's where we rest. Then we have the state of dreaming, which is more or less self-explanatory. That's where we see all of our weird dreams about being chased by a clown and, and then transforming into a dragon and flying away and blah, 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 the state of dreaming. And then finally, this fourth state, which kind of in the, once again, very roughly speaking, Hindu sacred literature, Hindu scriptural tradition is referred to sometimes as Turiya, the state of Turiya, which is kind of described as a very special state of consciousness outside of time, beyond time, or beyond time and space. And Buddhists have their own ideas about that, which we will look at a bit later. But here, yogic sleep or yoga nidra is associated with this specific state, beyond time and sort of beyond space, beyond normal awareness, beyond the waking state, beyond the kind of dark and gloomy state of sleeping without dreaming, beyond the state of dreaming. This fourth state, which due to its qualities, due to its energetic qualities, is particularly good for attaining self-realization, or sometimes even equated with self-realization. So for that reason, it is desirable to attain that, because a yogi practicing within the fold of the traditional yoga lineage of, for example, what is described in Hatha Yoga Pradipika, or even much early on in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, this kind of yogi or yogini, they would be practicing to eventually move towards self-realization, towards the realization of the ultimate nature, towards freedom, the state of moksha. They're not just practicing to relax a little bit. They're not simply practicing to feel better about their body, to kind of improve the subjective quality of their life. Yes, those things are important, but they would have that ultimate goal in mind. And for that, this fourth state of Turiya is important. One of the ways of attaining that is through yogic sleep. So we're getting a little bit more clarity on how Yoga Nidra can apply to an individual as opposed to the goddess or Vishnu. We're seeing that here, through such advanced practices as Khechari, one eventually might be able to master the state of Yoga Nidra or yogic sleep. And through that, a person, an individual, a practitioner would eventually move into something that is closely adjacent to the state of self-realization, and then moving on from there, one would eventually attain that actual self-realization fully. So that's kind of a more clear strategy. It's quite advanced, it's quite profound, but there's a bit more clarity on how to move in that direction. Then when we approach the 20th century, and that's, I almost said that's where we are right now, but I'm guessing not, but I don't think the vibe kind of changed that drastically from the 20th century. But when we approach the 20th century, and we have just left it behind very recently, 24 years ago, feels like yesterday. When we approach the 20th century, that's where we see Yoga Nidra arising as an actual practice that is commonly taught in different traditions. In different ways, yes, with different technical details, with different variations, but generally commonly taught as a practice that you can read about in books, that you can attend in a yoga studio, that you can do yourself by using a guided recording. So it's something much more approachable, something much more clear. The thing about that, though, is that there's no particular, from an academic point of view, of researchers trying to trace very precisely the genesis of that. How did it go from this quote in Hatha Yoga Pradipika and similar texts, the Tantras and the Agamas and the Upanishads and so forth? How did it go from there to our modern stage where almost at any yoga studio there would be a Yoga Nidra class? And what is the connection between this profound state of consciousness that is attained through practicing such advanced methods as Kachari Mudra and these practices of kind of deep guided relaxation that you're doing in a yoga studio? So that is sort of a mystery. There's no particular clarity on that. There are different scholarly opinions. People who analyze this from an academic point of view, meaning from a point of view of a historian of these traditions, find it a bit perplexing as to how some of the people in the 20th century who started propagating Yoga Nidra practices, such as Swami Rama, Swami Satyananda Saraswati, and some others, how do they arrive at those specific techniques? How do they derive them from the original text? Is there a clear source for that? Well, not in particular. There are some theories as to what influenced the rising of the creation of those specific practice forms that we're kind of seeing so commonly these days. Some researchers think that there might actually be a Western influence there, that responding to kind of Western passion about relaxation and to the guided, gradual, incremental relaxation techniques that were becoming popular in the West, such Indian swamis as Satyananda Saraswati adapted the more traditional material in a very specific way that would be palatable for a person who's approaching the general yoga tradition with a wish to also relax deeply, because that's what they need. There are other versions of that. Of course, there are also interpretations in which people say, oh, no, that this was just a hidden oral tradition, and then this person came along and they made it public. So there was no adaptation, there was no adjusting. It's just, it was secret and now it's manifest. So that's another view of it. At the end of the day, there's no ultimate conclusion from the academic point of view. But from a practice point of view, what's important is that we have these three large stages: ancient mentions of Yoga Nidra, then medieval mentions of Yoga Nidra, and then the current stage at which we're dealing with very specific techniques for practicing Yoga Nidra that do seem to be connected to these earlier stages, but not always. Whether there is that connection or not depends on whether we ourselves as practitioners or providers or facilitators or organizers or people who write about this stuff, people who promote this stuff, whether we provide that general context or not. We could take those techniques that arose in the 20th century and go into, I don't know, an office of a company. Let's say we get invited by Google or something like that. We could go into an office of a company and indeed say, oh, it's just a relaxation technique. You're all very stressed. Now lie down on your yoga mats and cover yourself with your blankets and just listen to my bubbly voice and relax. And it would work and it would be of benefit. And there's no doubt that people do need to relax, because boy, are we getting, a ride from the large market machine that's around us. But at the same time, if we personally, or as providers, facilitators, researchers, and so forth, do feel inspired to make that connection to the early stages, that's totally possible. As a side note on this, I would say that this very clumsy introduction to the history of it that I've just done is, indeed clumsy. And in no way would I claim to have explained it very clearly. But for further reference on both this and points related to Yoga Nidra in the more traditional yogic tradition, I would suggest a book by Tracy Stanley called Radiant Rest. So I'll just drop the name in the chat, and we'll include that in the notes that we will hopefully send out. So it was published by Shambhala a few years ago. It's really lovely, and Tracy Stanley is doing her best to both cover the lineage history to the degree that it's available to us right now, talk about sort of the different streams of the Yoga Nidra practice and the modern kind of yoga market, essentially, and provide some helpful tips for how to run Yoga Nidra practices yourselves, or how to do them. The difference between her book and what I'm going to present is that she's coming kind of firmly from the yoga slash kind of quote unquote Hindu yoga. Once again, that term is kind of in itself controversial, but it does have some explanatory power. She's coming from that position and is kind of trying to place the treasures of Yoga Nidra in the reader's hands. My job in this case is to also make some connections to the Buddhist practices that are similar to Yoga Nidra or very closely adjacent to Yoga Nidra. Because if you are also interested in Buddhist practice or meditation or mindfulness or the whole kind of field of research around meditation and mindfulness and Buddhist practices that as they are being adopted by the modern quote unquote global world, this is where my presentation might hopefully also show some similarities and show at least that there's no contradiction, and that Yoga Nidra practices can very strongly enrich our practice of all these other methods, and all these other methods can be plugged into a specific Yoga Nidra session very easily. So that's with regards to the roots. So we now know that at least the term Yoga Nidra has existed for at least 23 centuries, potentially more. We know that it existed in the Middle Ages as a very specific state of consciousness that one might approach, and that it still exists today. But there are differences in how it was interpreted at these different stages. So enough with the history, even though that's kind of my favorite thing. So if I could, I would just stay there, and you would definitely fall asleep, and mission accomplished. But for now, moving on. So from all of this, we can see that there are two large definitions of Yoga Nidra that are important when we are essentially seeing the term Yoga Nidra in a specific text or article or book. And that could be a scriptural authority text. It could be a modern day text. It could be a research paper. I've read a few kind of in trying to see in what's the current state of modern Yoga Nidra research, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as well. When we're seeing the term Yoga Nidra, it's as always important to identify what is the meaning in that specific context. That's one of the main things that Buddhism teaches to people. Any specific term can have a number of different interpretations. It is always important to identify the specific meaning, the specific interpretation of a thing before we try to understand the whole thing that we're dealing with. If we don't have a clear understanding of the meaning of a term in a specific context, our entire interpretation of the thing that we're looking at can become very confusing and wildly incorrect. So one large interpretation is Yoga Nidra as a state, the state of yogic sleep. So you're probably all familiar with this much more than I am, because many of those present are actually yoga facilitators, yoga teachers, some people with with a lot of experience, much more surpassing mine very strongly, I would say. So, but yoga, one of the ways of translating it is yoking. That's kind of where the shared roots is, where the shared root, Indo-European root is connecting, combining, conjoining, basically yoking two things together. And Nidra just literally is translated as sleep. So yogic sleep, or the sleep of yogis, or the yoga of sleep, we would find all these different translations. But Yoga Nidra as a state, let's just say yogic sleep for simplicity, it is a state of sleeping in which we still maintain awareness. And not just awareness of the darkness, that's kind of, that type of awareness is always there. even when we are in deep dreamless sleep, we're sort of aware of that heaviness, but that's not a right type of awareness. It's not an awareness that allows us to really make any mental movements, to do something with it, to explore it, to understand it, to analyze it, to probe it. We're just there kind of in that soup of darkness until we eventually reemerge into either the state of dreaming, in which kind of different appearances start arising for us, or into the state of waking, in which, once again, appearances arise, and here we are with all of our, plates of macaroni and buses and rainbows and the rest of the stuff that we're dealing with on a daily level. So in this yogic sleep, unlike the regular dreamless sleep that kind of non-practitioners enter, in this yogic sleep, we maintain a state of awareness. And because we are in a much more refined, fine state of mind, a subtle state of mind, much subtler than the one we have in our waking state or even in our dreaming state. Because we are in this really relatively subtle state of mind, and we have the awareness, so we can actually do something about it, that state can be used once again as a stepping stone for spiritual realization. What we do in that state to gain that spiritual realization would be kind of vastly different depending on the specific practice tradition that we're following. But it would often be along the lines of trying to understand the nature of that awareness, or trying to understand the nature of the subject that's experiencing that, or trying to understand the nature of everything, including that awareness and the subject. So that would all usually be kind of along those lines. So using the strength, the power, the potency, the vibrancy of that state of mind to become realized, that's a shared goal that is commonly used, commonly described in the Buddhist and the Hindu, once again, roughly speaking, traditions. There are probably other traditions that employ these methods as well. I'm going to focus on these two, the Buddhism and kind of roughly speaking Hinduism, because these are the two that I'm mostly familiar with regards to this context. So then we have the other understanding. Yoga Nidra is a modern day practice. In most cases, if you're opening a website about yoga or a yoga themed magazine, or you're opening an article about relaxation techniques in Cosmopolitan, this would probably be the meaning, not the first one. Yoga Nidra is a specific practice that is popular these days. So it's kind of like Vipassana and Vipassana. Vipassana traditionally is a term that refers to the entire bandwidth of insight techniques within the Buddhist tradition. In this day and age, when people say Vipassana, they kind of either mean roughly the insight meditation movement or a very specific type of retreat that sometimes would not even have actual Vipassana practices within it, even though hopefully it would. So same thing happened with Yoga Nidra. It can be described as a specific practice, or in a more traditional state as that state of awareness that we can eventually cultivate or enter or master. So when Yoga Nidra is a modern day practice, it is usually a practice of progressive physical relaxation. Relax your left foot and relax your right foot. We're going to be doing this soon. Usually combined with a number of meditative techniques and meant to induce both relaxation itself, because relaxation is good for people who are not relaxed or don't have that skill, and also for eventually, in the long run, after lots of training, can be used for inducing the yogic state of Yoga Nidra itself, that yogic state that is described as the first definition of Yoga Nidra here. So these are kind of roughly speaking the two definitions. Once again, so when we're reading Hatha Yoga Pradipika or something like that, it would not be what we're seeing there is not a reference to necessarily the Yoga Nidra practices that are offered commonly in yoga studios. But there is a connection if we want to make that connection, if we want to make that bridge to build it. So a quote from one of the papers that I've read on research of the efficiency of Yoga Nidra with regards to different mental health issues. These are researchers by the names of Pushplata Rajput and Sangwat Singh. They did a research on the effectiveness of Yoga Nidra practice, this modern day practice, for abused children and teenagers for their mental health. The results were promising. The study itself, I should say, was not controlled, so there was no control group. And was a relatively small study, and to make it reputable, many more studies with stronger parameter or with better design experiments could be organized, but the initial results were good. The initiative itself is incredible to offer yoga nidra to children who have undergone abuse and are now going through a recovery process or kind of dealing with the traumatic aftermath of that. So the initiative itself is incredible. And in the introduction to their paper, this is what they're saying. Yoga nidra is qualitatively different from relaxation, meaning just general relaxation techniques, right? Just lying down and relaxing or stewing in a jacuzzi. It is a powerful relaxation technique derived from the tantras. So because some of those roots are traceable back to Devi Mahatmya, and there are mentions of Yoga Nidra and Devi Mahatmya, and then in further texts. Initially, we are arriving at the modern day practice, but we're kind of tracing some of the roots back there. Yoga Nidra is a systematic method of inducing complete physical, mental, and emotional relaxation. So hopefully this is already feeling somewhat delicious and like, yes, give me, that's what I want. During the practice of Yoga Nidra, one appears to be asleep, but the consciousness is functioning at a deeper level of awareness. As a side note, I would say, ideally, that's what's happening. Normally, what's happening if you're running a Yoga Nidra in a studio is that someone actually falls asleep, and starts snoring. Last time we did a Yoga Nidra, shortly after the New Year's Eve at Sangha Yoga School, there was we had like a talk about White Tara, and then we did a White Tara themed Yoga Nidra, and someone did fall asleep and snore, and someone next to them was very, very annoyed about that. So it happens naturally. We are overworked and underslept and all of that, so we do fall asleep. But through training, and if we have a lot of kind of energy in the body enough to not fall asleep, we would be able to arrive at this stage. It would seem like we're asleep, but we would actually be still awake and aware. For this reason, Yoga Nidra is often referred to as psychic sleep or deep relaxation with inner awareness. So that's kind of the essence of it, to relax deeply while maintaining the highest level of awareness possible, maintaining as much clarity with regards to our awareness as we can. While that's being done, we would be normally guided, if we're using a guided recording of Yoga Nidra or we're attending an actual class, instead of guiding ourselves. Or if we're guiding ourselves, we would still go through these steps. We would go through certain stages. So in the more traditional approach that was popularized by Satyananda Saraswati and the so-called Bihar school of Yoga Nidra, we would go through 8 stages. Some other schools, modern day schools of Indian origin or Western origin, would offer or suggest other combinations of different factors. And actually in Tracy Stanley's book, you would see a number of different options that she eventually crafted as different ways of doing Yoga Nidra. And her book is accompanied by an audio version of those practices. And those are also available on Shambhala Publications website. Even if you don't have the book, you can check them out there on the page, the kind of the web page of the book. And so we would normally therefore see that in this day and age, not everyone uses those 8 steps, but these 5 points described here on the slide are more or less always present. So the first point is usually establishing somatic awareness, just bringing the attention into the body, into the tactile field, looking at all that, and starting to relax. That's stage 1, and it's usually the one that's present in all the different practices. The second one is a fairly interesting one because it is somewhat controversial. So that is called establishing one's sankalpa. Sankalpa here refers to one's intention or powerful aspiration for something larger than oneself. And so in this 8-fold approach that's used by or 8-step approach that's used by the Bihar school, this step of working with sankalpa, and it's usually done in the beginning of the practice and in the end of the practice, has become really important. So we establish a certain aspiration, kind of like we did in the beginning of this session today. We work with it, then we move on to other steps, but at the end, we return to this aspiration. The controversy lies in the fact that when researchers tried comparing this approach to the traditional text that it's supposed to be derived from, they saw that in those texts, there is a mention of letting go of all sankalpas instead of establishing them. Instead of working with intention, you have to release all intentions, which also makes sense in terms of moving on towards this state of non-grasping, non-reification, profound spaciousness, and so forth. Here, however, we are working with the intention, and we're invited to work with an intention. And what's fun about this is that from a Buddhist point of view, this is actually perfect, because in the Indo-Tibetan tradition of Buddhism, everything starts with this sankalpa type work, with working with our intention and aspirations and motivations, establishing them very powerfully. And that work is, in this day and age, described in psychology as cognitive work, working with our cognitive domain, the domain of our wishes, desires, and aspirations. So we establish that first, and then we move on to any kind of whatever other practice we're doing, whether that's concentration or insight or the cultivation of loving kindness or really anything else. This Sankalpa work is seen in the Indo-Tibetan tradition of Buddhism as central, fundamental, crucial for everything else that follows that. And so while more in the fold of Hinduism, there's some kind of different opinions about that, I should say. It's not the biggest controversy, for sure. There are much bigger issues, but it's kind of debatable. For Buddhists, oh, there's no problem with that. Let's do it. Absolutely. It's just that Buddhists have very specific sankalpa that they typically work with, the aspiration to fully wake up for the benefit of all who live. But we're also welcome to add minor points to that, our own kind of more specific aspirations related to this kind of stage in life or this period in life and so forth. All of that can be added to the overall large wish to become fully awakened for the benefit of all who live. So that's step number 2. Step number 3 is going through the different parts of the body, performing either a body scan. That's the term that was popularized by, once again, Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is one of the main propagators of modern-day mindfulness, or by going through different body steps, not necessarily in a sequential order, not from our feet upwards, not from our head downwards, which is usually, these are the 2 main ways to do a body scan. Now, sometimes we would be guided through very specific body steps, following a more traditional schema or a more traditional map that does not necessarily correspond to this upward to downwards kind of directions of movement. So but in either or in any of these approaches, we would go through the different parts of the body, establish a sense of awareness and relaxation there. And that's, I think, it's something that's shared by all Yoga Nidra approaches. The next one, next step is also fairly common and, of course, very closely related to meditation in the Buddhist and Hindu traditions in general. It's observing the respiration. Some people would know that statistically speaking, at least that's the conclusion I'm coming to as a kind of a person who's curious about this type of research. The most common type of meditation in modern day world is mindfulness of breathing. It is used in it is used in almost all secular modalities, at least the one that kind of describe themselves as scientifically backed, including mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and so forth. But it's also used in the Buddhist tradition, in the Hindu tradition, in the Taoist tradition, in the Orthodox Christian tradition, in the Sufi tradition, and probably in many other traditions across the world. So for that reason, it is extremely common, extremely beneficial also, and is commonly integrated into Yoga Nidra practices, like the one we're about to do. And then the next step is using our creative imagination or using creative images, meaning playing around with our imagination if that's available to us. As a side note, some people do have a special state, a special condition or a special trait that prevents them from having any mental imagery, including dreams. That's a unique trait, we could say. So for those who experience that, no need to force themselves and then get worried, oh, the images are still not coming because I just don't have mental images ever. No, not to worry. There are plenty of other things to do in Yoga Nidra practices. But for those of us who have at least some rudimentary images available to us, kind of like when I say pizza, do you have, roughly speaking, an image of a pizza coming up? Well, if that's the case, then you can absolutely play with this step as well, and it will yield certain beneficial results too. And the idea there is now that we're deeply relaxed and deeply settled, we can play with our mind and expand some of its capacities, expand some of its abilities, and also see how powerful it actually is. Because normally, if we're only focused on the body, we might be neglecting the mind a little bit or very largely. So immediately connected to that are some of the benefits of these modern day yoga nidra practices. These are just common sense benefits that we can play around and see if they're true or not. Also, as a side note, some people would know when Buddhism presents different practices and says, you should do meditation like this, you should do a meditation like that. After its history is presented, when the history is presented, very often the next step would be to talk about the benefits of a specific practice and the shortcomings of not doing that practice. So this is very skillful scriptural marketing. And these traditional Tibetan texts written in the 14th century and even before that, you would see them marketing practices for us, not to sell them, because there was no selling of practices back then, but just to convince us to peruse some of these methods, to play with them and see, oh, yeah, this actually does bring me these benefits, and I am avoiding these shortcomings of not having done this practice. So in this vein of kind of trying to market yoga nidra practice that you can do on your own for free at any stage, or join an organized facilitated session with an instructor you trust, some of the benefits here. Well, first of all, yoga nidra practices are very commonly accessible and require little preparation. And because they're done in a supine position on an approximation of the supine position, you don't always have to be in shavasana, because some people don't even have shavasana available to them due to unique situation with our body, their health, or joint health, and so forth. Sometimes even shavasana is not fully available. Not a worry. Whatever kind of relaxed position, whatever sort of approximation of the supine position that's available to us, we can use that for yoga nidra as well. So at least if we're not being dogmatic and super stiff about it. So commonly accessible, little preparation is required. This is not like joining an advanced asana class or pranayama class where you do have a certain level of preparation for that specific level. Yes, of course, there are kind of restorative yoga classes that are doable or accessible to everyone, but some of those Ashtanga classes I would not dare to enter because first of all, I would die in the first 15 minutes, or, I'll just be lying there in a pool of my own sweat. And second, some of the movements, some of the asanas would not be available to me with my level of flexibility and just basically with my preparation. Whereas with yoga nidra, not so much of an issue. The worst thing that could happen in yoga nidra, generally speaking, is that we'll fall asleep and we'll start snoring. Well, all the more reasons to try doing yoga nidra on our own, where snoring would not disturb others. Second benefit is very obvious. It's a practice for relaxing at the bodily level, at the somatic level, at the tactile level. So the more we relax our tactile kind of our body, the more we experience the benefits of relaxing the body. And this is something that doesn't even need here scientific justification. If we do feel tense, if we do find kind of areas of tension, sometimes chronic tension in the body, for some people it's more around the diaphragm, for some people it's in their back, in their shoulders, in their face. Some people experience chronic headaches because of a specific type of muscle tension in their forehead. So all sorts of kind of quote unquote fun, meaning weird things happen to our bodies due to the accumulated tension. Well, this is a way of working with that. And yes, initially we will experience relaxation in the areas that are easier for us personally to relax, but eventually, due to the overall relaxation effect, it will keep expanding. And even the parts of the body where we traditionally kind of for us personally carry tension, even those will get more relaxed. Another thing, of course, associated with just general the connection between relaxation, stress, and our health is that through establishing deeper degrees of relaxation, we can establish deeper degrees of stress resilience or stress resistance, and we can experience the associated health benefits. So for those who are interested in this type of research, I always, in this day and age, say one of the best sources to explore is the work of Elissa Epel, who is a researcher both in the field of behavioral change with regards to our environmental crisis. That's her more recent major, and in the domain of stress and its effect on our health. And she's done amazing research showing how relaxation interventions, including being in retreat, meditation, and things like that, affect our cellular health, including the way in which telomerase is produced, our telomeres are lengthened or shortened. So essentially, she's researching the effect of stress on epigenetics and vice versa, the effect of relaxation techniques and interventions. So always a good source to explore. We will include that in the notes. And in general, the place to start is either her book, The Stress Prescription, which is a great book for the modern day and age, or her podcast with the Mind and Life Institute. And this is a practitioner of meditation and inner well-being herself, so she knows what she's talking about. So, and that's something that we can potentially explore. And imagination training, by using all those visualization practices, we train our imagination. That's always helpful. In addition to that, many people, that's kind of more on the creativity side, many people report that when they are in this deeper relaxed state, and for some people it happens in meditation, for some people it happens in yoga nidra and similar practices, when they are in that deeper state, answers, decisions, creative solutions come to their mind, which I think is fascinating and amazing. But it makes all the sense in the world. When our gross conscious, coarse conscious activity is temporarily released, our deeper levels, including our intuition, can present us with the necessary answers. And then the next point here is that we're actually undertaking cognitive training by working with our sankalpa or intention. So cognitive, once again, refers to our ability to desire, to wish, to aspire. It is the least researched part of our mind, but one of the most important. One of the first scientific papers on that is going to be published this year by the Center for Contemplative Research in Colorado. But as many people probably know, just in general, what we do with our desires matters, because a lot of other aspects of our psychological activity rely on that, to the degree where Tibetans have a saying, everything exists on the tip of a wish, meaning it is what we do with this cognitive domain, with our ability to desire, to aspire, and so forth, that organizes our cognitive abilities, our attentional activity, our emotional activity, our ethics, and even our spiritual experiences. All of that revolves around this fundamental aspiration or goal or aspiration that we might have. Well, here we're working with it to make it stronger and to make it more noble at the same time. We're kind of perfecting it, and then we're strengthening it in our mind, whatever it is that is our highest aspiration. And that will affect everything else that's happening to us. So also a wonderful element. It's truly amazing that it exists. And whether it is traditional or not, whether it was introduced in the 20th century, or whether it existed always, doesn't matter. From a Buddhist point of view, it has to be there anyway. So great that it's there. And so eventually we might also progress towards self-realization, but that's a story for another day. Well, this is where Buddhist yogas of sleeping and dreaming come in as well. So Buddhists use this dual presentation of sleeping and dreaming as well. So Nidra is the Sanskrit, Ni is the Tibetan, and I'm using Tibetan phonetics here, not Wiley, which would be a way of writing Tibetan with all the silent letters, which is confusing for those who don't know how to read that. And then on the other side, Svapna, dreaming, or Milam. So these are two states that we have from a Buddhist point of view, especially from the Himalayan Buddhist point of view, where there are an incredible amount of practices and knowledge related to that. We can gradually bring awareness into both sleep, including the dreamless sleep, and into dreaming. So when we bring awareness to dreaming, that introduces us to lucid dreaming. And from lucid dreaming, we can then step onto a more advanced stage known as dream yoga. Within that dream yoga, we can play with our dreams, transform them, use them skillfully, and eventually gain, once again, spiritual realization with that. But even if we don't go that far, just playing with our dreams actually teaches us a lot about our own person. And there's now research done by Charlie Morley, for example, on how dream yoga practices and lucid dreaming practices can be incredibly helpful for PTSD recovery, for post-traumatic stress disorder recovery, even for example, war veterans and so forth. So that's very fascinating. All sorts of applications for that side. And on the other side, the yoga of sleeping where we bring awareness into the states of dreamless sleep and also into the state of falling asleep, which is what we're doing with Yoga Nidra. That eventually opens the door to cognizing the true nature of our own awareness. So we'll include some books, kind of some references to books that you can read if you're interested in these two types of yogas. There is lots of wonderful introductory material on both the dreaming and lucid dreaming side of things and sleeping, dreamless sleep kind of awareness. And this would be kind of a next step to take after you've become familiar with Yoga Nidra as a relaxation practice that we're about to do. So the next step from that would be to go deeply into these. And some people have a natural propensity with those to the degree where they start practicing it, they develop those skills, they practice it for decades, and then boom, they get enlightened. That's what happened with some of the masters of the Indo-Tibetan tradition. They attain their primary realizations through these methods. Not to say that that's going to happen in the next few weeks, or as a result of this specific session, but this is just to say that if you're inspired by all of this, oh, like, wow, I could master the states of awareness, that's something to explore, and that's definitely something that is taught and practiced and applied in this day and age, so totally available. Then another thing related to this from a Buddhist point of view, and then we'll go into, I think, well, let's just deal with this first. Another thing related to the Buddhist approach is that, generally speaking, Yoga Nidra practices can be also helpful, as we established, for relaxing. But this is where a modern-day famous Tibetan teacher by the name of Tsoknyi Rinpoche, who's one of my teachers as well, introduces this concept not just of stress and tension, but of the threefold speediness. So there's kind of a speed limit, meaning a certain limit to what's available to us before we crash and burn. There's a physical limit, and that's just related to the actual physical movements that we make. There's a speed limit to how fast we can run or for how much we can abuse our joints before they turn against us, So that's the physical limit. For mental speediness, there's a limit to how much we can do with our intellect, meaning how much computational capacities our mind has before it kind of starts feeling spaced out or tired, or it's, just gives up on us. And once again, we're like, oh, I can't do it anymore. I'll ask me next week or in a couple of years or never, if we feel completely intellectually burnt out. But then there's an emotional level. And this is a very fascinating one that Yoga Nidra is particularly helpful with, I feel. This emotional speediness is just the feeling of being rushed, the feeling from the inside that we need to rush, that we need to go and accomplish and do more. And it's like that kind of sense of being out of breath internally, even though our body and mind, our intellect and our physical body may be up to whatever it is that we're doing. Just internally on this kind of more feeling side, we might feel, I'm not sure what I'm doing, and I'm not sure if I'm doing it successfully. So checking for that occasionally is a very good prescription for Yoga Nidra, meaning if at any point you catch yourself having that feeling, you can apply different practices for just coming back to the body and kind of relaxing and slowing down. And Tsoknyi Rinpoche teaches some of those in his wonderful book, Why We Meditate, co-authored with Dan Goleman, who's famous for his emotional intelligence book and many other types of work that he's done. So they do teach some practices for that in Why We Meditate. Once again, another reference for this session. But Yoga Nidra, I would say, is another wonderful recipe to use just in our daily life on a regular basis to see if we can, through that, eventually let go of this sense of exceeding our inner kind of emotional speed limit so that we can do everything that we need to do from a state of profound inner restfulness. That's certainly one thing that, based on my observations of people and my very humble personal experience, I've seen happen for people with Yoga Nidra practices. Yes, it's a 20-minute, 30-minute relaxation thing that we can do before we go to bed or in the middle of the day, whenever. But over time, because it teaches us these profound skills of relaxation and potentially even deeper awareness, we can really learn to be very skillful about these speed limits and therefore do everything from a greater space of ease. So hopefully that's enough of a marketing prompt. My final note on this, and then we can go into the actual practice, is that If you feel interested in all of this, or if you explore it a bit more, even if my presentation wasn't enough, but you can read Tracy's book or play with some other materials. If you do feel inspired by it all eventually, and once again, just as a kind of as a side note, there is promising research on how Yoga Nidra can affect emotional recovery, how it can serve as a wonderful thing to deal with emotional pain. It can affect a variety of different psychological issues and disorders. It has a positive effect on our body because, of course, it activates the relaxation response. Therefore, it should have an effect on our telomerase and telomeres and all of that. But that research is generally speaking at its earlier stages compared, for example, to mindfulness research. Mindfulness research, we have so much of it now that there are meta-analysis of meta-analysis being produced. And that just shows that the results are very consistent about the benefits of it. When Yoga Nidra is isolated, it's just a technique of its own. There is research on it, but there should be more. So if you're a researcher, that's an idea. But if you're not, we will probably see amazing research, more amazing research come out in the next years and decades. While we're doing that, we can do our personal research. And one way of doing it is playing with Yoga Nidra techniques, for example, for 30 or 60 days. So you can use my recordings. I have some. You can use Tracy's recordings. You can use a number of any good recording that you find to be high quality and reasonable, and the person that's guiding it knows what they're doing. And then just practice with it for 30 or 60 days and see what changes with regards to those speed limits and just your overall well-being. And if you do feel more relaxed, join me in this wonderful field of just giving up on your career and becoming a Yoga Nidra provider and just relaxing everyone until the whole world is at peace. Well, not necessarily that, but if you feel inspired by that, that's something that's easy to share in all sorts of ways. So let's share it by entering a shared space of practice. So as a preliminary note, for Yoga Nidra practices, it is better to be kind of lying down in whatever position is available to your body. So if you can lie down in an actual Shavasana position and cover yourself potentially with a blanket, some people like to have a bolster underneath their knees and a pillow under their head. If that works for you, perfect. If not, use a position that works for your body, but is kind of similar in that you're very deeply relaxed. And then once again, you can keep your camera on or off. Doesn't matter in terms of your practice, but if you want to share your vibes, that's fine. If you want to be in a little bubble, that's also totally fine. And then the first thing to do is just to make sure you're nicely, comfortably relaxed in that position. Not yet deeply relaxed, we're not yet starting the actual practice, but just still and settled and comfortable. Generally, most people choose to close their eyes for Yoga Nidra practices, but if you know that you're definitely going to fall asleep if you do that, it's totally fine to keep them open. As long as you're comfortable, as long as you can keep your gaze sort of spacious, or just focused on one particular point that does not trigger thinking. And then the first step after that is to return to the body and its tactile experiences. We sometimes describe it as allowing the awareness to descend into the space of the body. But if you're lying down, it's less descend into the space and more expand into the space. Feeling the totality of the tactile experiences arising in the body right here and now. In particular, it's good to notice, that's always a good beginning step, to notice the contact between our body and the ground that's holding us. And we can make our practice eco-dharma oriented if we want by feeling that our body is actually a material and energetic extension of the earth. Our body consists of the 5 elements borrowed from the earth, on loan from the earth. And we are an extension of the energy of the earth as much as trees or mushrooms or any other living beings or living entities. So feeling our connection to the earth, we can allow it and its gravity to gradually start taking away our attention. All the tension present in the backside of our legs, in our buttocks, and across our back. All the tension in our facial muscles, our neck, our chest, and then equally our abdominal area, our pelvic floor, and the front side of our legs. And then, once again, extending our awareness to the entirety of the body with all of its tactile experiences. And sort of as a preliminary intention for the rest of this practice, aspiring to keep our awareness vibrant and clear as much as possible. While we're working with these deeper states of relaxation, trying to maintain a certain level of awareness, even if we're just aware of our sleepiness or the heaviness in the body or the sluggishness in the mind. Because it is through this training in awareness and its clarity that we actually attain the state of Yoga Nidra, the state of sleep in which we are luminously aware. And with this preliminary intention, exploring our larger aspiration, meaning our large aspiration for our contemplative practice, for our contemplative life in general. That's what our sankalpa is connected to or is referring to, our highest goal. Daring and expansive, and at the same time loving and compassionate in that it can, if that resonates with us, include the well-being of multiple sentient beings or all sentient beings potentially. One example of that is aspiring to fully wake up in order to bring benefit to all who live, or aspiring to fully experience our own amazing nature and then share the beauty of that with everyone. And so finding our own aspiration of that nature, and once it is firmly established in our mind, for a few moments, just breathing life into that. Strengthening it very gently without forcing the breath. Just resting with that wish. And then returning to the body, knowing that this intention or aspiration is going to be in the background of our mind. And we can once again explore deeper degrees of relaxation by now performing a more detailed body scan. Starting with our left foot, exploring the sensations there. In the toes, in the foot itself. Then around our ankles, our left knee, and our left thigh. Similarly, exploring the sensations in our right foot, the toes, the foot itself, our right ankle, the knee, the thigh. Observing the sensations around the hip joints. And then in the pelvic area. Checking to see if our pelvic muscles are sufficiently relaxed. Exploring the sensations in our buttocks, noticing their contact with the ground. And once again, the overall sense of groundedness, of being in contact with the earth. Then, similarly, exploring the sensations in our abdomen. Just noticing them with curiosity and openness. And then exploring the sensations in the lower back. Similarly, our upper back, and the area of the chest. What is being felt there? Just noticing that. Then our right shoulder, right upper arm, right forearm, and right hand with its fingers. And then the left shoulder, the left forearm, and the left hand with its fingers. Then becoming aware of both hands at the same time, just resting with them, noticing their stillness and how relaxed they are right now. And then coming back to the shoulders and exploring the neck. And then the back of the head, the crown, and the facial muscles. And from there, returning to the totality of the body. And this time, noticing the gentle movements of respiration, the sensations triggered by the process of inhalation and exhalation. In particular, how it feels when the body very gently expands and contracts. And this is where, if we wish, we can feel that with our body expanding and contracting, with our body breathing in this way, the entirety of the earth and all of its beings gently breathe as well. Multiple individual energetic fields expanding and contracting together with a large energetic field of the earth. In the background, we know that that's happening. And in the foreground, we're observing the sensations of our own body breathing. Allowing this gentle rhythm, completely unforced, and yet observed carefully, to gradually balance and heal our mind, our body, and our nervous system. In particular, helping us to release any type of grasping for external stimulation, addiction to external stimulation. Seeing that we can just be restful and abide with what's happening in our body right here and now. And then as the next stage, instead of playing with visual imagery and visualization and other things of that nature, although those might be very helpful, in this case, we can play with something different, with our cognitive energy, our energy of desiring and wishing once again. This time using it to find the most meaningful wish of loving kindness to offer to ourselves and to all who live in this moment. The basic foundational wish that is commonly used by many traditions is just that beings might be happy and have the causes of happiness. But we can be a bit playful and combine, string together the specific words, nouns, and adjectives that feel right for us right now as a universal wish for everyone's well-being. For example, if we feel like right now that peace, joy, and clarity might be a meaningful offering to everyone, we could use that. Sending this wish for peace, joy, and clarity into the depths of our own body, into every cell, into every corner of our mind, and also to all who live, to all those connected to us by the planetary body of the Earth. Similarly, we can use our own wish the one that resonates with us right now as being universal and meaningful and timely. Identifying that and then sending it out to ourselves, to every corner of our being, and through the earth to all who live, including those who are practicing here right now with us. Using the natural exhalation to send it out more powerfully. And in return, opening up to receiving similar wishes of loving kindness for ourselves. At all times, there are beings practicing loving kindness, sending loving kindness, simply being kind and radiating kindness. And so if we open up, if we relax and tune into that, we can feel tenderness and loving kindness entering our body, along with numerous beautiful wishes sent out by other beings. Allowing that energy to percolate in our body, saturating our energy field. And it's from that state of feeling nourished and nurtured by this energy of loving kindness that we can return to our initial large aspiration, our initial large goal. Once again, strengthening it in our mind and gently dedicating the energy of mindful awareness that we have just been working with to this aspiration, so that this goal might indeed be realized for all who live. And from there, returning to our body, to the tactile sensations, to the immediacy of these somatic experiences. Very gently, very slowly coming back to a state of more active awareness. And this is where we can introduce some movement to the body at a very slow pace, starting perhaps with our fingers and toes, very, very slowly and gently moving them. Then very gently, equally, reactivating our facial muscles, very gently opening our eyes. And without getting up and feeling rushed, if we are on our back in the supine position, we can very gently turn on our right side, rest there for a little while. And that at our own pace, when we feel ready, using our left hand as support, we can very slowly get up and spend some mindful moments in the upright position. And then from there, we can return to the more active state of awareness and conclude this practice. Thank you. So if you felt good, wonderful. If you fell asleep, also kind of mission accomplished, at least you slept. One thing about it is that over time, it becomes easier to maintain the awareness, but we're literally talking about months of training, retraining our nervous system to maintain awareness while allowing the body to be deeply relaxed. That's why this journey into yogic sleep is a very gentle one, but it needs to be a gentle one. That's what the beauty of it. It's a restful practice for resting. So one thing not to do is not to push ourselves and not to tell ourselves we're a loser for not getting it right or whatever it is that we're doing, kind of having internalized some pressure from the outside. The purpose of this whole thing is to be playful and restful. So if to any degree that was accomplished, wonderful. And even if not, and maybe it's just my horrible voice or my way of narrating it, and you would find Yoga Nidra instructions that you really resonate with, and they will truly help. So that's my wish. May we all develop clarity and restfulness, and then bring that to all who live. That's pretty much it. It's bedtime for most of you, and it's nap time for me. So once again, deep bows of gratitude to all of you for signing up, to Kat and Phil for organizing it all. Very much looking forward to seeing you all again in this digital space, and just wishing everyone a restful, peaceful, joyful night. Thank you so much. Bye bye now.